Welcome to The Other Coast, a podcast dedicated to the Malifaux meta in Los Angeles. My name is Jeff, and with me here today is another player in the SoCal area, Colgan.
Hey everyone.
Hey Colgan. So today we are going to be talking about upgrades. So to start us off, maybe you could explain what upgrades are.
So upgrades, or I guess specifically the ones we're talking about, are faction upgrades.
Mm-hmm.
So faction upgrades are basically extra abilities and sometimes actions that you can attach to models in your crew during the crew building phase. General faction upgrades, they cost 2 soul stones, and you can have generally a maximum of 2 within a crew. And yeah, so there are ways of, I guess, like increasing the defensive capabilities or offensive capabilities of your models depending on the actual abilities given by the upgrade.
Right. So you mean you can only have 2 upgrades total, or 2 of each of the general upgrade?
2 of each upgrade, yes.
Got it, got it. And, where is that information?
It's actually listed on the card itself. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll say like plentiful, and then I'll have the number in the little parentheses. In this case, I'll have a 2 next to it. So this will come into play. Like upgrades can also be given out during the course of the game by certain models. So one, I guess, common example that you might see are summoning upgrades, which summoner masters will attach to units they summon into the game. Most of them are going to start base Plentiful 2, but it will be upgraded if that summoner is the master to Plentiful 5, meaning you can have like a maximum of 5 summon models out on the table during a game.
Right. In the case of the summoning upgrades, I guess it's kind of a minor way to nerf bringing them in as second masters just to summon models.
Yeah, but I think like the only summoning master I've ever seen like run into the max summoning limitation is probably Summer.
Yeah, and he's even got a trigger to where you don't have to attach the upgrade.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. Uh,
I actually ran into it using a Sami, which I was surprised because I thought her guys would just die fast enough. I had to intentionally destroy some of them in order to summon something else I wanted.
yeah, I'm kind of surprised you hit that limit with the Sami because I feel like you're generally just like suiciding them, and if not, like their defenses aren't great. None of her minions actually have defensive upgrades, right? Or defensive abilities.
The Obsidian only has like armor, and the Jorgomo I think has extended reach or something like that. But yeah, they're not
Right, right.
really tanky in particular. I think I was just really far ahead in that game, so my
Oh,
stuff.
oh yeah, yeah. Now I remember. That's like the game where you're playing against one of the newer players, and you're
And
just
let's
like,
not
"Fuck it,
talk about like this
let's
is
just
a.
do dual master." Because like, I mean, he's played a couple of games already, so this should be fine.
I thought he had played many more games than he had. I yeah, but anyways, so what we're gonna be talking about today are what you might hear called the general upgrades, and we're gonna try to go faction by faction. And today's faction is the Arcanist, and the Arcanists have 3 general upgrades, and the first one we're gonna talk about is Soulstone Cache. And Soulstone Cache, it's plentiful too, so you can have 2 of them in your crew, and they cost 2 stones. So Colgan, without necessarily just reading out the card, because anyone can just read the cards, do you find yourself taking Soulstone Cache, and why?
So if I'm running Raspy and I have the Ice Golem, I'm pretty much always taking Soulstone Cache because it lets you negate like almost all damage on him between armor 2 and just being able to use Soulstones to negate damage as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that, he has this Blizzard aura, so you can put out like Hazardous 1 and Hazardous 2, and any models that die within 3 inches of him just kind of like get you your soul stones back. So I feel like in any kind of like fighty strategy or scheme, you get your Ice Golem stuck in, you drop your aura, it's very easy to start actually just getting back the cost of the upgrade.
Right. Is that an important consideration? I mean, do you take it because you expect to recoup its cost?
Yes and no. I guess the fact that I can recoup the cost kind of makes it like almost an auto pick. Because, all right, well, as long as the game goes, because I want my Ice Golem to get in there and start killing things. And as long as he can kill some things, it's technically like a free upgrade in my mind. So, like, why wouldn't I just take this to let my, Ice Golem just be immune to all types of damage and just be the biggest pain in my opponent's side that he can be?
I see. Now, it does cost 2 stones, which you do think you're going to recoup at least some of its expense. But
Hmm.
it's also creating another demand on your soulstone resources, right?
Yeah.
So, in effect, do you actually find that the soulstone cache is soulstone neutral from a revenue standpoint? That the stones you make offset both the cost and the stones you use for it?
Yeah, I mentioned this I think in an early episode. I always like to go into games with like anywhere between like 5 and 7 soul stones just to give me options. But it's not like I'm ever expecting to use like 7 soul stones in like the first 1 or 2 turns of the game, right? I have those soul stones because I'm planning to use them throughout the course of the game. So I feel like spending 2 of those stones in early and dropping myself down to like maybe 5 or 3 soul stones depending on how many I take doesn't actually affect my strategy too much when I have the ability to get those stones back during the course of the game. So if
Mm-hmm.
I get those 2 stones back before like turns 3 or 4, before I would ever use those stones that I stockpile in the beginning of the game, then I don't feel like there's any actual difference in gameplay to me.
I see. Do you only use this defensively? I mean, you've mentioned the ice golem and the context. I mean, you haven't said explicitly, but it sounds like the primary use for it you use is damage reduction. Do you use it for other reasons, like to for plus flips or minus flips on the damage it might take, or for suits or anything like that?
Yeah, I still do that. It's less common with the ice golem just because, he has that ability where if he's within 1 inch of an ice pillar, he just adds rams to his attack.
Mm-hmm.
And like his other trigger, which is chill, which is nice, but within Rasputina's crew, which is usually the only time I run him, is you have so many options for passing out slow through other sources. I generally don't feel the need to burn a soulstone to try and slow the target. But if you are going against like their master or something, it can be really useful because you have the ice pillar set up to give you the ram trigger. So your first attack, you spend that soulstone to slow the enemy, and then when you have that built-in ram, you're hitting with min 5 attacks on the enemy, and you have flurry, so you're going to get a minimum of 10 damage if you get your hits in after that.
So other than the ice golem, which sounds like kind of a specific use, are there other models that you might look to take soulstone cache on?
The ice golem's the big one. For other cases, I tend to use it less, and that's just in general that most of the times that I'm usually using my soul stones offensively, it's generally my henchmen or my masters that have the triggers that I really want to ensure, or the ones that I'm trying to keep alive. And if I'm trying to keep a minion or an enforcer alive, like I would generally lean towards magical training over soulstone cache, just so I don't need to burn extra stones to help keep them alive. And I also get the nice counter spell for when the enemy tries to declare triggers to squeeze out a bit more damage.
Sure, sure. That makes sense. So, I mean, I guess your last answer also kind of covered this, but in terms of its minion only ability, is that ever a reason to take Soulstone Cache?
For soulstone cache, I would say no. Empower just feels so situational to me, and it's just. Oh, let me reread it again because I've never actually put this on a minion. Friendly models within 5 that spend 1 or more soul stones during duel with Sifa. No. Like I would never use that because it's limited within like a 5 inch aura, which isn't like super small, but it's an extra thing that you want to think about. And generally, when I'm using a soul stone to add a trigger to an attack,
Mm-hmm.
I only ever want to do that if I already have a card in hand high enough to make sure that attack will go off. So getting like a plus flip to that is like, sure, I guess that's all right, but generally if I don't have the confidence that the attack will hit, I'm not going to burn a soul stone in order to add the suit to that attack in the first place. I guess there's the possibility that you burn a soul stone and instead of getting a single plus flip, you get a double plus flip. But also, I very rarely use soul stones that add a plus flip to it. Like most of the time, I would prefer to just like focus and attack because I feel like the soul stones give you a lot more flexibility, and being able to secure a trigger is much more important than having like a slightly higher chance to hit something.
Right. I mean, I could see that. I think damage reduction is by far the most common use that I see, and it is, I think, probably the most common use for me. That or suits. But I do think there's something to the argument that like a soulstone is definitely worth an action point in the right circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're having to spend your action to focus, or if you're having to make an attack get minus because serene countenance or conceal or whatever, a soulstone to bring that to a straight flip on a critical action could definitely be worth it.
Yeah, for sure. And so, how about you? Do you see yourself taking like Soulstone Cash quite a bit? Do you have any models that you like to take it on or anything like that?
I actually take it very rarely. Now, I don't play Rasputina. I don't think I've ever played her before, actually. Not in second and not in third. So, yeah, I don't think I've ever played her before. That Ice Golem, I've seen it before. I played it against it before with Soulstone Cash. It makes sense. I understand why people do it. And if I played Raspi, I would probably do it. I think it excels in high value model, right? So that, the Ice Golem's an expensive model.
Mm-hmm.
And when you layer the Soulstone on Armor 2, it makes it quite resilient as well. So actually, one area where I think it could be interesting is in a Hoffman crew. So if you run Hoffman Arcanist, you can stick the Arcanist upgrades onto even his guild faction model. And so he's got some pretty tanky constructs that are also minions. And I think functionally it'll achieve a lot of what you're getting with the Ice Golem, but you're also going to get this Empower, and in that situation, maybe you might end up using its minion ability.
I guess like I haven't played Hoffman too much myself, but just looking at the cards and stuff, I feel like I might not take it in a Hoffman crew just because with the power tokens, you're able to already add like plus flips or suits to your attacks just by expending that. So I'm not sure how often I would be using the Soul Stones offensively.
Yeah, no, I could see that. I do think for mechanics like power tokens, I think there's often this sense that you're almost always going to have a power token available. Like if you look at balanced discussions online, when people are trying to make their point, it seems like they always start from just this optimal position. Whereas I've often found in games that, opponents do a pretty good job of forcing you to make tough decisions about how you
Mm-hmm.
want to use your resources. So having another resource pool available for your critical models, I'm not saying you would put this on everyone, but like for instance, the Guardian. The Guardian's like a 9 point tanky construct with a great sword, right? So it's going to be able to kill. It's going to be able to take some hits. It's already 9 stone, so it's already quite an investment to take it. That's the kind of model that I think would benefit in a similar manner to the Ice Golem, and yet still be able to use Empower. Especially if you're, I don't think the Guardian has it, but if you have a model, for instance, that has an attack that can make it irreducible or make it so it can ignore armor or something, like one of these really high value triggers, or like you can't put these on executioners, but just as an example of the kind of category I'm looking at, if you could guarantee execute on an executioner without having to have the high crow in hand, it really increases their value, and for a single stone there are many situations where that can be worth it.
Mm-hmm.
So to me that would be when I would look to take it. But in general, do I take it? No, I don't. And maybe it's because of the kind of crews I play, or maybe it's just because I'm so greedy about my soul stones that I don't want another drain on them. But it's probably my least picked Arcanist upgrade.
Yeah, I can understand that. I mean, I think you're never really taking it for the minion part because, most minions aren't that tanky, and being able to use soul stones, like, while yes, that is a form of damage reduction, it's very resource intensive. And unless you have like a very fighty model, and most minions aren't really great at fighting, so if you're not able to recoup those stones, it will burn a lot of stones if you're just using it for like even defensive purposes, because you're already putting yourself 2 stones less than you normally would, and now you're going to be dedicating some of those stones to keeping the model with that upgrade alive, since it doesn't actually increase the capabilities of the model itself. It really just gives you the option of getting some stones back, or potentially just like treating them as a pseudo henchman or a pseudo master in the sense that they can use stones.
Right. Are there any crews that you wouldn't take it on? I know you said it's virtually an auto include on your Ice Golem, but is there
Uh-huh.
any opposing crew that you would just be like, I don't think I'm going to get either enough value from the killing side, or that it has enough like irreducible or other ping damage or whatever that that's going to make it unappealing to you for its abilities.
Unlike specifically, like if I'm going with like Raspy and I have an Ice Golem against certain crews, would I just never, or would I just decide not to take this upgrade?
Right, like yeah, I mean, what would be a crew or a situation where you would decide not to take it, if any?
I can't think of any off the top of my head because I feel like if I'm taking the Ice Golem into a match, then I'm relying on it to kill things because he's really good at killing things. And as long as I'm able to kind of like get him into a fight and, just be where he wants to be, I feel like the ability to reduce damage and keep him alive long enough for me to set up pillars for a full heal or just get kind of silent ones in position to just like use their healing ability on him and keep him topped off is really, really strong.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like just having the Soulstone Cache on him in and of itself is kind of a deterrent from the opponent trying to burn too many resources into him. So you're able to kind of move him around a little bit more freely on the field.
Right. So I mean, even facing like a levy, for instance, wouldn't dissuade you.
I mean, I guess maybe in that case it might, since fucking irreducible makes everything useless. So I guess in the specific case of Levy, I might not grab it. But then I guess I'm also wondering, would I even want to take an Ice Golem against Levy? But I would have to play some games against Levy because I've never actually seen him on the table before.
Gonna need to volunteer for some of those vassal games that Tyler's trying to get.
I'll just bring 2 masters and I'll be fine, right?
I don't know what you're talking about. But so it sounds like the circumstances that kind of invalidate Soulstone use, at least on the Ice Golem, the way you use it, would also kind of invalidate the Ice Golem itself as a pick. And so it's never a question of, oh, like, I wouldn't put Soulstone Cache on it. It would be like, oh, well, I might not take the Ice Golem in the first place.
Right, because I'm thinking like most forms of damage reduction, if you're like going against if you're going against an Ice Golem with the idea, it's like, oh, I can ignore the armor, but then I can fall back on the Soul Stones to kind of like keep that tankiness.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you have no way of getting through the armor, I have those Soul Stones to make him essentially immune to damage of 3 or less.
Right. What about like a heavily ranged crew?
So heavily ranged crew, I mean, specifically talking about Rasputina, like I would grab Snowstorm and just like charge up the board. And then, I'll still have Soulstone Cache so I can get those stones back or just kind of set up his insane damage combo.
Mm-hmm.
If I can't get slow on the enemy before the Ice Golem goes, like just on a single turn, like he can somewhat reliably push out 13 damage.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think Soulstone Cache, one of the things that's really interesting about it is that there are a lot of great Enforcer models, but the big knock on Enforcers is that they just don't have the reliability of Henchmen and Masters, and they don't have the resilience, again, because they cannot use Soulstones. So what Soulstone Cache kind of does is it lets you turn a favored Enforcer, or, I mean, potentially maybe Minion, into a Henchman in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think that's also what's going to affect the usability of it a lot, right? Because like it doesn't actually enhance like the base abilities of the model like a lot of other upgrades do. So in a sense, you want your base model to be good because giving it the ability to use soul stones, which is essentially all it does, just gives you more reliability. And if the base model is not already, I think, kind of like very good at what it does, you don't want to spend 2 stones for the upgrade and then additional stones just trying to make sure you get a certain trigger off or trying to keep it alive, unless it's like very vital to your plan, or in the case of the Ice Golem, just really good at killing things and getting those stones back for you.
So does seeing Soulstone Cache on the opponent's side, on one of the opponent's models, does that change your gameplay at all? Is Soulstone Cache the kind of upgrade that's going to impact your decisions, when your opponent has the upgrade?
Maybe for like deploy movement, it wouldn't affect it as much. And again, it's really going to depend on which model they have it on, right? So like you look at the model and see like which triggers it has, like why do they have Soulstone Cache on this? Like what are they expecting to do? Like which ability do I think they're going to try and spam or burn those Soulstones for? And I just kind of keep that in mind. And, there's also times, especially since now that you know that they're able to use soul stones to try and prevent some damage, that it might make me a little bit more careful about how many models I commit, or how much force I commit to try and removing the model early, or if I feel like it's exposed.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that. So I guess last question on Soulstone Cache. Where is this a good upgrade? Relative to, I guess, the entire universe of upgrades, and in terms of the Arcanist upgrades, where do you see this? Is this number one, number two, or number three? Like in terms of like how good it is.
So I feel like the upgrade in and of itself is fine. Like I like it as an upgrade in and of itself just because I feel like it has its uses, but it's not necessarily something that is like very overpowering or like oppressive. But with like certain models, it can be very good.
Mm-hmm.
Within Arcanist, because the other Arcanist upgrades are so good, I feel like it would be. I probably agree with you. It's going to be the one that's kind of the least picked and the least powerful out of the three. But I don't think, like, to me, that doesn't signify that it's a bad upgrade.
Right. I mean, I would tend to agree with that. I would also probably say, like a backhanded compliment to myself because I don't take this upgrade. I think this might be one of those upgrades where better players are able to use it much more effectively, right? So some of the upgrades we're going to talk about, like magical training, it gives its benefits passively, so there aren't
Hmm.
like decision points you have to make. Whereas for this upgrade, like putting it on the right model and being able to maximize the new capabilities that model gains through the use of soul stones is probably going to like dictate in very large degree how much value you're seeing from this upgrade.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think it is also a little bit more of a risk in a sense that in order to make full use of the upgrade, you need to have a fairly strong soulstone cache. Just taking the upgrade, you're already reducing the amount of stones you have. So I imagine if you're trying to get full effect out of this, your crews are going to tend to be a little bit smaller than if you were to take one of the other upgrades.
Yeah, I could see that. Makes sense. I didn't really think of that before, but now that I look back, because it goes on a more expensive model just by its nature, so it often ends up, I think, on more elite models. And elite models, I think elite models benefit a lot from being in an elite crew because part of what prevents focus fire of a great model is having other really pressing targets. So
Hmm.
I have to find if I'm facing a crew that has like maybe only one or two threats, that crew is much easier to handle than a crew with three or even four threats.
Right. And then there's also the case where you already have like the 2 point tax for magical training, which is pretty much an auto take in Arcanist.
So one last use I think we should mention about the Soulstone Cache before we move on, and it's really kind of become the preeminent use for this upgrade, is sticking it on the Mechanical Rider. The Mechanical Rider, like all the riders, is a very effective model, but it is an enforcer, and you don't really want to use its fate tokens to reduce damage. So Soulstone Cache does make it more resilient. But the most important use of it is to stone for a tome when you do its tactical action Reveling Creation. Because if you stone for the tome and you have a tome in hand, that will allow you to use its 5 tone trigger starting on turn 2. And that's a very powerful trigger. It allows you to reactivate another model in your crew as long as it's not a master, and that model can be anywhere on the board. It's not limited in range, and that's something that does catch out a lot of people. They assume that there is a range limit or that it has to be within 6, which is the range of the base action. But you can actually reactivate any model anywhere, and it gets another full activation. And if you do it to the duet can actually split apart and then reform and do another activation. So it is kind of a niche case, but it is a very potent one and one of the more common uses you'll see of this upgrade. And if someone includes the mech rider in their crew, they're pretty much always going to include this upgrade.
Getting 4 activations from a core free duet seems pretty good. So is that like a common thing you'll tend to do? Like when you get the core free duet, is like the mechanical rider always something you're kind of eyeing when you're building a list?
I don't because when I play Colette, I prefer to play it straight keyword. In second edition, Colette Super Friends was basically the list, and I pretty much had my fill of that, so I refuse to do that in third. But it is something I think you'll see in top tier play a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. You just have like the surprise 4 activation, and you just always have to keep an eye on the core feed because it's seems like what I think with the Soulstone Cache, you said turn 2, you can basically get another activation. So the Corfu Duet is always a potential threat.
Yeah, I mean, the duet is a model that you always have to keep an eye on, anyways. But many people do fail to appreciate that the duet, you can reactivate the duet, and then the duet can split apart. And because these are replace effects, these are new models. So the duet can split apart, and the new model that it creates won't count as having activated yet because of the way Malifaux treats activations. So then, when after you split apart and the first Corfi's action is done, you're then able to reactivate the second Corfi, reform the duet, and take another 2 actions with it. And if your opponent is able to range this at the end of the turn, that's 2 activations of the duet that you're not going to be able to respond to, and that is very frequently going to be devastating and may even just be enough of a lead to give them the game right there. So if your opponent has the Mech Rider and the Corfi Duet, you've gotta account for this possibility.
Yeah, definitely something to keep in mind. Though I feel like even knowing about it, it's kind of hard to react properly. It seems like you're basically just doing your best to like mitigate the losses instead of actually coming out ahead.
Yeah, in a way, knowing about it might make it worse because you know what's coming, but there's nothing you can do. Like an asteroid that NASA says is gonna hit Earth in like 37 days. What are you gonna do? But just sit there and check off the calendar until the asteroid gets there.
Yeah, could definitely make the situation worse by panicking and overthinking it.
So I guess one, aside from killing things, just keep in mind that your opponent does not want to have to use those fate tokens for anything other than their 5 trigger action. Well, I mean, they can potentially draw cards from it too, but that's a much less common use. So you really just want to pressure the Mech Rider. If you can force them to use those tokens to reduce damage, then it's going to delay their ability to do this.
And I guess if they're running with so many elite models, even if they're stoning to reduce damage, their cache probably isn't going to be that sizable. Or if it is, they're probably running a very low model count crew. So you might have other ways to kind of push that activation advantage.
Yeah. Although remember, if they have a low model count, they're going to have pass tokens, right? So a lot of opponents will try to arrange it so that the final action in the turn is going to be their Mech Rider, so that they can then reactivate the duet twice. I mean, they may not have the duet, but especially if you're facing someone who can hire the duet at cost, because Mecha Rider is itself versatile, you really just have to assume that this is a play that they're going to be looking to get off. So let's talk about Diesel Engine. So Diesel Engine is another 2-point general upgrade in the Arcanist faction. It is restricted to constructs only, so the model that you put it on has to be a construct. And yeah, other than that, you can put it on any model in your crew. So Colgan, do you find yourself taking Diesel Engine?
I will take Diesel Engine against really shooty crews because having permanent concealment is great. So the only real construct crew that I play within Arcanist is Mei Fang.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of her constructs already have the I think Vent Heat, I think is what it's called.
Right.
Which basically allows you to put up an aura that gives you concealment and also damaging enemy models.
Or
But
Vent
even
Steam,
then,
I think.
Vent Steam. Yeah, Vent Steam. But even though I have that ability, there will be times I'll take Diesel Engine if I know I'm going against a shooty crew, so that I don't need to force an early activation in order to get that concealment up. And just having it out passive and like protecting all my models is really nice. And just knowing that, you're just making it very inefficient to try and engage you from range. And the fact that it's a 3-inch aura and that you're able to cover multiple models with it is really, really useful.
Right. Actually, Sputtering Exhaust is only 2 inches, but I mean, yeah, that still can cover a good deal of models. Now, for Vent Steam, is it only enemy models, or only friendly models to gain conceal? Because for Diesel Engine, it gives conceal to all models within 2, friendly or enemy.
Yeah, I think Vent Steam gives it to all models as well. It's just generally enemy models don't want to be within that aura because you're just going to be pinging them for damage unless they're a construct as well.
Right. So yeah, it's got this defensive ability. I mean, it also has charge through. On Mei Fang crew, do you ever find that relevant? Like, what kind of models do you put this on Mei Fang?
So I'm pretty impartial to the mechanized pork chop. So I'll usually drop it on him just because he has a lot of movement. He can go to AP3 with his reckless, and he also has self heal. So I feel like he's a he has a lot of movement, so I can kind of move concealment to where I want,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of disrupt the shooting that way. And like, yeah, charge through it's great. Like, I wouldn't say I necessarily like plan around it, but being able to get a plus flip when you charge in an attack on like a six move model, potentially 3 AP, and like any other models on the crew, since the 2-4-5 damage track is pretty common within Mayfang's crew,
Mm-hmm.
helps with like ensuring that you're getting those higher damage tracks and you're not just hitting for min too. So it makes it much more of a threat. It's like it's hard to take down from range because of the concealment, and when you do engage, you're getting you're able to get a straight flip on the damage, which gives you a much better chance of getting that 4 or 5 damage, or just letting you cheat that in.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, plus flip on damage. If you're not if you're not familiar with the game yet, you might read it and think sometimes it's a nice thing to have, but it's really not that important. But once you played a couple of games and you realize that it's turning all of those minus damage flips into straight flips, which just can open up a universe of options in terms of what you might be able to achieve for a turn, right? Like it suddenly makes a bunch of models killable in a single activation and maybe even a single action that just before you could not do.
Right. So then how about you? Do you find yourself, I mean, you said that you prefer Diesel Engine, or at the very least that you find Soulstone's Cache to be the one you almost never take. So when are you usually taking Diesel Engine?
So I have taken this several times. Obviously not as commonly as magical training, but Diesel Engine sees play in my crews. Obviously Sputtering Exhaust is very strong. Concealment Aura, Conceal is just so much better than Cover.
Oh yeah, because no one has gun actions in Alpha. Guns are for guild losers. Everyone else just uses magic. Maybe it's magic. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we should really do our episode on Cover someday because we've definitely spent enough time kind of talking about just how quirky it is. And in fact, I think Conceal is so important that I play the Crossroads 7
Mm-hmm.
from time to time, and I usually run them 10 Thunders, even though I don't necessarily want Lust to be my leader, but just
Mm-hmm.
because the effigies concealment aura is, I think, just very, very useful, especially compared to what a lot of the other effigies offer. So I think the concealment thing is very big. The charge thing I haven't used a bunch, but the minion only ability to get the 3-inch move is why I've taken it a couple of times. And so what I've done is in Gaining Ground 0, actually this is going to be a digression because this isn't the minion ability, but in Gaining Ground 0 when Zoraida was really strong and I was having some problems, really trying to figure out what to do with it. One of the things I did try is taking the Choraphy duet and just accepting that I wasn't going to split it and putting Diesel Engine on it to give it conceal,
Mm-hmm.
which really made trying to obey it much more difficult.
Right.
Now, in the end, I think positioning is probably a smarter defense, and it's better to just get the AP efficiency of splitting the duet. But if you're maybe not as confident in your positioning, or you think your opponent is going to, maybe your opponent's more experienced and you think they're going to be able to find you almost no matter what you do, that is an option. But one of the ways I have used the minion only ability is I've put this on Soulstone Miners instead of Magical Training, and I put Magical Training on something else because I'm not going to give up that card. But what Soulstone Miners can do is at the start of their activation they can destroy destructible terrain. So I've played games against I think it was Euripides, and I stuck this upgrade on my Soulstone Miner, and so the ability to move at the start of my activation and then destroy the ice pillars around me was making it much more efficient to clear them. And Soulstone Miners are models with a lot of value anyways, so I never felt like I was losing out by using them as kind of like glorified marker clearances.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. It's always great to be able to clear pillars without having to expend a lot of action or high cost models to clear those for you.
Yeah, and it also, it lets you do something else which maybe isn't apparent at first, but it lets you position them outside the aura where you have to worry about discarding a card and gaining slow,
Right.
knowing that you can then push in and clear them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it does to a certain extent kind of fix your activation order if if you want to free other models.
Right.
I think that's a trade-off that's just very much worth it, and it's something that you face playing Raspy anyways, right?
Right.
It's like, oh well, yeah, I don't have Soulstone Miner to clear it. I was going to clear it by activating this dude, getting slow, and using his other action to destroy the pillar, so that my master wouldn't have to face it. So, I often find it's kind of avoiding that issue.
Mm-hmm.
I also think it's kind of obvious to say that this would be good in a Hoffman crew with construct, but Arcanists also have a number of just excellent versatile constructs.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, obviously the Soulstone Miner being one, the Steam Arachnid Swarm, the Mecha Arachnid. These are all really good models. The Steam Arachnid Swarm's 8 stone, so quite pricey. And so, I think these are models that can gain quite a bit from it. So I'm a pretty big fan of Diesel Engine, and I probably don't take it maybe as often as I feel like I do, but it definitely sees play.
So are there any times where you won't take it or you don't feel like it's worth it? Is it something you generally take as kind of like a counter pick to the enemy crew you're fighting, or is it something you'll kind of throw in unless there's a reason not to?
I actually think it's probably quite situational. So, like again, for me, the Soulstone Miner destroying terrain is one of the more common ways I've used it on Soulstone Miners, because otherwise if I want to protect a Soulstone Miner, I don't rely on a concealment, or I just don't have it in play, right?
Right.
I just have it bury and dig up gold or whatever. I think it could be quite useful against ranged crews, whether they're shooting crews or Zoraida. If you have a model that you are willing to use as kind of cluster in with the rest of your ball of death, and it would just sit there and screen the rest of your models. As far as crews I wouldn't take it against, well, so I probably wouldn't take it against a crew that's going to get a ton of free focus, not because it's not valuable, but because at that point I don't think I'm going to get enough value for paying the stones for the concealment aura.
Right.
At that point, I think I would just rely on terrain or positioning or something like that, rather than being like, oh, I'm going to bring in this conceal and it's going to give me this huge benefit. If I'm playing against Mawtucket, for instance, am I really going to get that much benefit from it? Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. Although one nice thing about this with the crews I play is, since I play a good deal of Colette, Distracted and Concealment are a pretty potent combination.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, so I guess models that don't really care about those minus flips, Shenlong before he got nerfed. Anyone who I guess doesn't really care about minus flips. There's not really that many of them. Melee centric crews, obviously concealment aura is going to be of much less value. I don't think the concealment aura is enough of a reason to take it. So if I don't have a model that I think I'm going to benefit from either the melee benefit of the charge through, or the extra move at the start of the activation, then I won't take it.
So does that mean you would never take it on a non-minion in most cases?
Well, I can't say that because I did take it on the Duet, who's an enforcer. I think I can see it on some of the higher cost enforcers. So I could see it on Howard Langston, for instance, to protect him and to give his charge attacks a plus flip. Because he's pretty nasty. Same with Joss. I might take it on Joss for the plus flips on the damage, and then I'm just giving up the 3-inch move. But if the abilities were inverted, if the 3-inch move was kind of the general ability, and the plus flip on charge were the minion upgrade, then I think it probably would have to be a minion before I would take it. If you saw this upgrade on an opposing model, would it impact your play at all?
Yes, because concealment is annoying as hell. So, I would imagine that, again, like you're saying, if I'm taking it, I do feel like it's a little bit more situational. It's not kind of an auto-include for me. But if I'm taking it, it's generally because I think, the enemy has a lot of ranged attack actions that I want to make inefficient, or just force them into just weird decision points.
Mm-hmm.
So if my enemy has concealment, then, if they're taking this, then it's generally on a model they either don't want me to hit, or they want to ensure that they're able to engage, or it's just going to be kind of an escort for his other models to make sure that I can't shoot them or lure them out of position without spending a lot of resources on doing so.
Right. Now, one thing to remember if you're considering this upgrade is that this concealment aura will affect your own attack actions. So if you have attack actions that you want to take on your own models, for instance, if you want to lure your models forward or obey them or whatever. The concealment aura will also affect you. As long as it's an attack action, concealment will apply, which you might not think matters because you'll be like, oh, well, I'll just relent. But a lot of these actions that you want to use on your own models also have target numbers.
Yeah, it can definitely feel bad when you have like some strategies where you're just kind of layering things up to get a little bit of extra movement, and you're just like, oh wait, I have to focus or I might just fail this and waste an action on my own guy.
Yeah, I mean, I find I encounter this more frequently than I should, which is just another indication that I play kind of sloppy in some ways. So like Wrath, for instance, I bring Wrath in every Pandora crew that I build for his aura. But since I don't really care about his actions, he frequently is using Bring It, the lure, the melee attack on Pandora and Candy, who don't have melee attacks. So it doesn't matter if they get into quote unquote engagement range, because I mean they don't even have engagement ranges. But because I'm kind of cowardly and my guys are usually in concealing cover, if I can manage it, it's always like, God, now I gotta focus to lure Candy, and it just feels so wasteful. So it is something to keep in mind in case that's part of your strategy. So now, in terms of where Diesel Engine ranks, within the universe of upgrades between all factions, do you think Diesel Engine is, objectively on the good side or on the bad side? And in terms of the Arcanists, where do you rank it? Like number one, number two, or number three?
Well, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious what we think number one is at this point. But I think in the universe of upgrades, again, this is another upgrade where I feels like where I want most upgrades to be, where it has like a very defined purpose, like it's good at what it does, but it's not something that's so strong that you're always taking it.
Mm-hmm.
So like in contrast, and I guess we'll get into it pretty soon about why, like I think magical training is just like an amazing upgrade, but I also feel like it's too strong relative to other upgrades in just like within Malifaux itself, because you need a very, very good reason to not take it, I think.
Right, right. Yeah, so I mean, I would agree with you. I mean, I think this is a good upgrade. I think it's, definitely not number one. So yeah, I mean, I would probably rank it number two in terms of where the Arcanist upgrades sit. Now, one thing I guess we didn't quite cover is it became pretty clear in Soulstone Cache that we were looking to put those on, like, sort of top flight, non-henchman, non-master models, right? Like your expensive kind of marquee models that you wanted an extra bit of reliability or protection on.
Mm-hmm.
For Diesel Engine, is there like a particular tier of model you think it has to go on? Or would you put this on kind of like a low-cost person just for conceal and just kind of like walk them around your important model?
I feel like the more restricting thing in terms of Diesel Engine itself is just the fact that it's restricted to constructs.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that'll affect your decision a lot, because I think, most Arcanist Masters, if you're looking at this, they don't have a model in keyword that's a construct. So you're usually either going to hire out Versatile, or you're going to be paying that tax to bring in a construct into your team so you can even put this on them.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, as far as like top flight versus low cost, I really think it depends on, what your opponent's doing and what you're using it for. You're giving your example of clearing ice pillars with soulstone miners. Like, I think that's a really strong case for putting it on him. So like, he's basically going to be supporting things with his concealment aura, because if you just didn't want him to be attacked, you would keep him buried most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But you're going to be using, his free 3-inch move at the beginning of the turn to get him in place to clear that destructible terrain, and then additionally give that concealment benefit. And I think it works great as either sticking it on the model, like a high cost model that you want to make sure has a little bit of extra defense, or just sticking it on a low cost model and just kind of keeping him as like a little support beacon to make it a lot harder to target a few models near him.
So would you ever consider taking maybe, I mean, not the swarm, but like a single steam arachnid and putting it on him? Or at that point, is that like, is that not a safe enough platform for your Soulstone investment?
Like for me, I think it would be all right to put it on there, because even if, your opponent will start focusing and targeting that, generally that means he's not spending those resources on hitting the guys that you want to keep safe. And especially since you're mainly using it against ranged attacks, I imagine, that'll generally buy you enough time that you're able to get your models in position to where you want them to be. I guess ideally you would have it, well, maybe not ideally, but there can be an argument made for either way. You can put it on a tougher model and still keep guys grouped up so that the platform is also an unappealing target and anyone near him is an unappealing target as well.
I mean, I could see that. I do happen to know that I've seen it used, for instance, on the medical automaton when out of keyword, like people text them in if they want a little bit extra healing, or I've seen someone put it on the mechanical toolkit in a Colette crew, so they're paying the tax, but the toolkit is there to buff up the duet. And so these are like these 4, 5, 6 cost support minions who themselves they're not really very sturdy, so it's definitely a risk to add another 2 stones onto them. But at the same time, it's kind of like what you're mentioning. Although these are useful models to get rid of, and your opponent would definitely like to do it if he can do it efficiently, by putting on this concealment aura, it's making it difficult to do efficiently. And so oftentimes your opponent has to prioritize other actions over getting rid of the model with this upgrade.
Yeah, I think in general, I would have to play around with the upgrade a bit more to see if I fall strongly in the let's put it on something tanky that can take a few hits, or like would I lean more towards like the cheaper support model. And I also feel like, in the end, it might just kind of come down to what your playstyle is and like what you prefer to do.
When you've taken it in Mei Fang, have you felt like you've gotten value from it? Like, do you ever regret taking it?
I don't think I've ever regretted taking it. Like, there's definitely been times where it's just like the flips don't go in my favor and my model kind of gets taken down regardless of having concealment or not, in which case it feels a little bit bad.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I never thought like, oh, this was a bad choice.
Sure. Oh, actually, I just remembered one more instance when I wouldn't take it. I wouldn't take it if I was going to play Sonya, or play against Sonya, who can ignore concealment.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's a good tip. Don't take upgrades if they can just be ignored. Next level plays.
Yeah. That seems like solid advice. So does that mean you never take upgrades against Von Stuck?
I've actually yet to play against Von Stuck, so I have that traumatizing experience to look forward to. I mean, I've read his cards. I'm not excited by the prospect, but I'm sure it will happen at some point.
Well, his students are finally releasing soon, so it might be time to put together a Von Stuck crew.
Yeah, maybe. I know Brian's got the core box. I don't know if they're painted up or not yet, but
I mean, as far as I know, I think they've just primed and they've been like that for a couple months now.
Gotcha. I have them too somewhere, but
You have so many models, you don't even know where they are. Wait, didn't you lose a model for a while? Didn't you lose a rider or something?
Yeah. I had lost a couple of models for a while, but they turned up. They turned up. They weren't at all where I thought they were. It's one of those things where it's like, how did this even get here? But yeah, they're here now. All right, so let's move on to the last upgrade of the Arcanist Faction, the bugbear of upgrades, the upgrade everyone loves to hate, unless you're an Arcanist player, in which case you kind of try not to talk about it during errata season. Magical training.
Yes, magical training.
So Colgan, tell us about magical training.
So magical training is pretty much the best upgrade in the game, and you should always be taking it. And you always want to take on the minion, just because Arcane Reservoir is so insanely strong. Getting an extra card every single turn into your control hand, it makes it so you're much less likely to have to burn stones to draw additional cards at the beginning of the turn, or if you do, it'll probably even be better for you since you have more low cards to pitch. And you're generally putting on a minion, and the general reason a lot of people kind of shy away from placing upgrades on minions, because even though you get that minion ability, by and far most minions aren't very tough. Mm-hmm. They can take maybe 1 or 2 hits and they're pretty easy to remove. Come in magical training, which gives you shielded on your model at the start of every turn and counterspell. So you put this on a low cost minion, and he's able to take maybe 1 or 2 more hits during the course of the game. By then you've already gotten a lot of value out of Arcane Reservoir.
So let's talk about the 7th card for a second, because I mean, I agree with you. Obviously, this ability is obscene. But I think if you're a newer player, you might be listening to this and being like, yeah, okay, obviously having more cards is just better. But 6 to 7, it doesn't sound like that big of a deal. Like, what is this extra card really doing for you? Why do Malifaux players like talk about Arcane Reservoir as just being this outstanding ability?
Yeah, as far as it being a great card, it's because the pressure you're able to apply to your opponent feels very disproportional when you have that additional card. Like, you can win more duels if your opponent tries to cheat against you.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes it easier to kind of just like force duels or try and pressure your opponent's hand because you have that additional card to out cheat them. Like, if you're at parity and, we're burning cards against each other to try and win these duels, if I have like one or two more cards, it makes it easier to get in a position where I still maintain cards in my hand where my opponent has no cards left in the hand and they're just flipping off the top of their deck. And at
Mm-hmm.
that point, even having like a mid range card, like maybe a 6 or 7 in hand, can be really powerful because you can win these duels or you can force actions to go through. I guess like it's hard to explain in like a very mathematical way, but just being able to consistently ensure more successes than your opponent is going to just give you an exponential advantage over the course of the game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would agree with that. And I think another thing I would add is that cards they're a very flexible resource in the game, right? So you not only use them for duels and for cheating and whatever else, but it's frequently a cost, right? Like for flurry or rapid fire, there are triggers where you have to discard a card. There's bonus actions like etheric healing where you discard a card and then you heal based on it. And so if you can't discard the card in the first place, you can't do it. There's things like execute where you have to spend the card to not die. I've actually heard on a podcast, I think it was on Third Floor Wars. I don't remember the episode or the context, but I just remember when someone else was talking about magical training, they said, when they described the seventh card, they said, that's another thing I know I can complete this turn. And to me, I don't see it with that degree of certainty. I don't think a card says it equals an automatic success, right? And I'm sure actually this person, who I'm not trying to avoid using their name, I just don't remember. I'm sure this
Not
person,
important enough.
I don't. Colgan said it, not me. I'm sure this person, given more time, would phrase it differently. I don't think that they necessarily meant it in that absolute term either. But my point is that the value of these cards extends to a lot of situations that you're not necessarily going to be able to foresee, but that is part of what makes having more cards available so powerful. It's the flexibility that just will increase what you can do or what you can avoid your opponent doing. Raspy's another example that we talked about, right? Like, discard a card or gain slow. When you're out of cards, you're out of options, and
Yep.
slow sucks.
Yeah, your explanation is way better than mine. Yeah. Having that extra flexibility is a huge thing. And yeah, the seventh card feels so impactful because, like, even though it is just one more card, like, in my mind, it almost essentially becomes like a free card I can toss away to effects like Raspy, right? Because, like, whatever, I'm just, like, down to a normal hand now.
Mm-hmm,
And, like, I
mm-hmm.
feel like just psychologically, it, like, gives me so much more breathing room.
Right. Well, and also, for instance, if you're going to sit on the Black Joker, going from 7 to 6, well, now you're just playing the normal game rather than going from 6 to 5.
Hmm.
This is an ability that, because of the way Malifaux is structured, not just its resolution system, but also, like we said, the way they handle costs. It's just fantastic. There's not really any other way to describe this ability. So, what kind of minions do you put this on? Because it sounds like whatever model has this is a target.
Yeah, I mean, so generally I'll put it on like support minions or minions that are like fine staying in the back. So like silent ones are, I think, a great target for this.
Mm-hmm.
I like because they can use soul stones by default. So if something goes bad, you can like burn a soul stone to keep them defended. They're usually pretty far away from the action since you can just kind of target enemies via ice mirrors, so you can get like 16-inch range, or they're usually healing or just setting up ice pillars from the back. Generally, the opponent needs to make a concentrated effort to try and engage them. And even when they do, you can burn a soul stone to reduce damage, and they can heal themselves using their own actions. And you'll usually have other models that can like run up and run interference for them. So I feel like by the time that an opponent is able to get a Silent One into a position where they can reliably kill them, you've already gotten the benefit of Arcane Reservoir for at least 3 turns, and potentially just taken one of their models out of the equation because they're just running into your backline trying to remove, the Silent One and trying to
Right.
get rid of Arcane Reservoir.
I realize this is probably a question without a firm answer. So those of you playing the other course drinking game, get your shot glasses ready. But how many turns do you think you have to have the model alive for to have gotten your 2 soulstones value worth?
Specifically for Arcane Reservoir, if I can get it through the 3rd turn, I'm fine with it.
Oh,
But
okay.
like the other abilities, just having shielded and counterspell on it makes it such an unappetizing target, especially if it's like on a lower cost minion that doesn't project a lot of threat. It can feel really awkward as the opponent to try and like run past the opponent's like master and their beater models or other scheme runners that are like moving towards the center line, dropping schemes and scoring points to try and take out this person in the back line to remove 1 card a turn from your opponent.
Right. So when you play Mei Fang, who do you stick this on?
Survivors, I'll stick it on quite a bit
Mm-hmm.
because it's really nice. Like when you get to throw your arm trigger, you don't even lose any HP from it.
Right.
You just like ping that shielded away, and like they have hard to kill and armor on them. So having shielded on top of that makes them again like very unappetizing targets. And they're usually in the back, just like hitting things with ranged attacks. So they're again not in a vulnerable position most of the time, and they're like still able to accomplish more or less what I bring them for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I usually put them on Soulstone Miners. It's not very
Oh
original.
yeah, I don't hate people that much to bring Soulstone Miners.
I never claimed to be among the avant-garde of Malifaux. I'm very happy just net listing it to to my solid 50-50 records. Yeah, and for similar reasons to why you mentioned the survivors, because the Soulstone Miner is going to be very well protected, even in the very few instances where I can't just leave him buried if that's what I want to do, right? Like if I'm playing against Tara or something, someone who can attack these buried models. Soulstone Miner's got armor, it's got decent maneuverability, combined with Arcane Shield and armor together, or not Arcane Shield, but just shielded and armor together are a very potent combination. Um, Counterspell is nice. I think you just try to find the safest, cheapest model you can put it on and just collect your extra card every turn. But outside of minions, I think this upgrade becomes more interesting. So, would you take this on a model that isn't a minion? Because you can have 2, right? So, would you have 2 in a crew?
Yeah, I would see myself taking it on, for enforcers or minions that I want to, or not minions, but, non minions. If I want to give them a bit more defensive options, I'll definitely toss that on. Like, Shielded One, it soaks up way more damage than you think it would. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, of course, like, it can soak up like a max of 5 wounds, but it's, again, I feel like it's another one of those psychological effects. Like, you never really want to attack a shielded model, especially if they have armor on,
Mm-hmm.
because it feels really bad to, get a hit through and then do like 1 or 0 damage.
Right.
And then, not to mention, like, if you're attacking, it's like, oh man, I flipped critical strike. It's like, okay, cool. Now you have to discard a card if you actually want to use it. So it can increase the staying power of a non minion by quite a bit just between shielding and counterspell.
Sure. Have you ever put it on Mei Fang?
I don't think I've ever put it on Mei Fang. I have put it on the Blessed before. For Mei Fang, if I most of the times when I want to create her defensiveness, it's from like ranged attacks. So I'd be more likely to put on Diesel Engine over Magical Training.
Mm-hmm. I guess I could see that. I mean, although she does have Vent Steam, right? And she has armor.
Yeah, yeah, she does have armor. So like it would combine well with shielded. Most of the time, it's just I'm more worried about like taking those hits from ranged in the first place, and like
Gotcha.
having to force Mei Fang to activate early to vent steam. And since she's a melee master, most of the time I don't want to commit her too early in the turn when my opponent could like reasonably just kind of like dogpile her and kill her early in the game.
Mm-hmm. I could see that. I find magical training is stapled to Colette. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
I've ever not taken it on Colette. And I actually I like to play Colette, and I'm not saying this in like, oh, this is like my patent strategy, or I'm the only one who plays it this way. I like to play Colette as a as her master, right? Just like her model specifically, in a very aggressive fashion. I like, she's got 3-inch engage, which is crazy. Like, why she specifically has a 3-inch engage, I don't really understand. But she has a 3-inch engage, so I like to stick her in the middle of as many enemy models as possible, and gum up the works. She's got a fantastic defense trigger that reduces damage by 2. So if you add shielded to that, it can, even make a 3-point hit nothing, potentially more if you spend a soul stone. And when you add in counterspell, it just makes it like a big pain to kind of dig her out of the center of your crew.
Mm-hmm.
And then, when I decide things are too hot for her, then I execute her berry and have her disappear. And I try to hold off declaring her trigger as long as possible, to try to keep her in the way. And I took this upgrade. This upgrade is what made me feel like I could play her into Shenlong during like pre-nerf Shenlong, when he could just take the 10 Thunders general upgrade that just turned off resistance triggers, so I couldn't use a resistance trigger. And then he had his own trigger to make things irreducible damage. And pre-nerf, he could use his stupid distracted trick to get a bunch of pluses on any of his attacks. So it included the attacks with the irreducible trigger. And so I would actually, even counterspell would make me comfortable taking her, because I would be like, well, okay, yeah, you can make things irreducible, but you're gonna need, to discard so many cards to do it. And so as long as I'm careful about the way activation order works, yeah, Shenlong might get a couple of hits in, but if he doesn't have the resources, he's not making him irreducible.
Right.
And so I actually, at an event I went to, I forget what city that was, I went with Jim. I went to an event and I beat a Shenlong crew, even though I forgot to trigger counterspell against him. And Shenlong actually killed Colette in turn 2, and I thought I was in trouble, but I managed to pull that game out. But it is kind of funny that I brought Colette into Shenlong because I thought counterspell would let me do it, and then I didn't even remember counterspell. So sad. Like in terms of counterspell, where do you think that that's like a great ability? Do you think it's it's nice if you have it, but or do you think it's like, well, there's a lot better?
I mean, it's really nice to have. Like, I wouldn't take this specific, like, if it was only counterspell, I don't think I would take it just for the counterspell, but it can definitely drain a lot of resources from your opponent, or even just make it to the point where they can't declare triggers against that model.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, any time that you can create a card deficit between you and your opponent is really strong, because the less cards they have, the more hesitant they are going to be to cheat into certain duels, and the less options they have to actually cheat in to kind of defend their models. So like, if they're burning a lot of cards just to declare triggers to hit your counterspell model, when it comes to your turn, you're able to ensure a lot more successes if you're taking opposed duels against them.
Right. Yeah, no, I could totally see that. And I think, I play Sonya quite a bit. She's my most played guild master. And, I can tell you, opponents have said to me after games, whether they won or lost, just the fact that so many models have counterspell makes it just, feel quite oppressive at times. Like there's just a lot of passive hand pressure.
Yeah, definitely. I think counterspell, and I might even just be understating it because I haven't gone up against too many things with counterspell. When I think about it, it's like, well, they can choose not to attack it, or it's like maybe triggers aren't super important, but it does have a very, how would I say, it basically discourages attacks against a counterspell model, and it can make it feel really bad when you have like, you flip and you get like an onslaught trigger, but then you, in your hand, you have like all high cards. Like, you don't really want to like chuck a 10 or 11 to declare onslaught against a model you're attacking. And it feels really bad because like, well, I pretty much got a free attack, but now like I can't capitalize on it because I don't want to just like chuck these high cards out of my hand.
Right. It also makes cheating for triggers really expensive.
Right.
Because you're like, okay, well, I really need this, I need this critical strike to kill this model. So I'm going to cheat in this critical strike, and I have to discard a card to declare it. So that's 2 cards to do it.
Mm-hmm. But if you have Arcane Reservoir, it's a bit easier to swallow, yeah.
Now, one thing I think a lot of people maybe don't appreciate about Counterspell at first is that it also affects defensive triggers. So as long as it's an opposed duel. So one area where I found it's by no means decisive in terms of the game outcome, but it's nice is, for instance, if you're playing against Kairos and Kairos has a tome, Kairos is always just going to say, okay, well, I'm going to declare the Blaze trigger, right? If your model has Counterspell, and if it's within 6 inches, all of a sudden those things that are just like these automatic little bonuses, now they have a cost to attach to them. And usually your opponent will say, okay, well, whatever, I'm not going to declare Blaze. And, one way I can see that being a challenge, just, having played some Bass, is like Bass's defense trigger can be just fantastic.
Right.
And, it's so good that, yeah, you would just always pay the card, I think. Because if you can just end someone's activation, that's great. The fact that it does reach 2 defense triggers is something that I find a lot of people don't really appreciate when they are talking about Counterspell online. Because there is sort of grousing about how the Counterspell has a range to it. It's not just in any duel with this model.
Right.
Which, yeah, obviously it would be better if it didn't have the range attached to it. And would Counterspell be overpowered if it didn't have the range? Probably not, but I think it's fine that it has the range.
Yeah, I didn't even really consider the fact that you can kind of force attacks on defensive triggers with it as well. Because in my mind, I just always like auto-completed it to like targeting this model. But yeah, that is definitely something to consider. If your opponent doesn't like have any cards left in their hand, then like defensive triggers like Colette's Barrier are just like, they can't use them anymore. It's like essentially like that other ability where you can't declare resistance triggers, which I forget.
Yeah, actually, I forget the name of it too. 10 Thunders bullshit. Like, it's a pretty rare ability, fortunately, because it's not universally applicable, but when it matters, it really matters.
Right. Yeah, it's a very nice like counter tech against certain crews. Like Colette.
Yeah, kind of like Ruthless or something, right? Like, if you're not playing against someone with Terrifying or Manipulative, it's just like a waste of ink on the card. But if you are playing against those things, it's everything.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so I guess we come to ranking. Probably going to be an easy and uncontroversial decision. But in terms of the universe of upgrades, and then specifically Arcanist upgrades, where do you rank Magical Training?
Oh yeah, top shelf, definitely. Like Arcane Reservoir, just being able to get Arcane Reservoir on demand is so insanely good. Like if Arcane Reservoir was the only ability on that card, I would still probably take it in like 90% of my games. Like, and I would still consider like just a top level upgrade just because of how strong that ability is.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. It's definitely top tier. It very well may be the best upgrade in the game. It definitely has to be in any conversation. Now, that doesn't mean it's always going to be the most impactful, right? Because, like we mentioned, there are tech upgrades that in certain matchups are going to be huge that very well could be more impactful than just one card in any circumstance. But yeah, there can be no doubt, and from all the complaining online, there is no doubt that this is just one of the best upgrades. It's definitely the best Arcanist upgrade. One thing I will say about its design, which, a lot of people say it's overpowered. It probably is. But one thing I do like about its design is that the best ability is on the minion ability.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's how it should always be. It's just, yeah, and I think we're both in agreement. It's just that in this case, the minion-only ability is just one of the strongest abilities in the game.
Yeah, and also all 3 of the abilities have kind of like a universal function. Right? When we're looking at Diesel Engine, Charge Through is a very nice ability for some models and completely useless for other models. But every model can benefit from Shielded One, right? Every model can benefit from Counterspell, because most models are going to face an attack at some point in the game. So it's not something where you have to be good to use it. It exists, and it just makes you better by virtue of it being there.
Right. And I think it's also like one of the few, if not the only upgrade that actually has like a universal ability in a sense, right? Because every single model in your crew can benefit from you having an extra card in your control hand.
Right. Yeah, for sure. The only thing I would say about the best ability being the minion only ability is I don't think it's something you can do every time, right? Because for some of these like tech upgrades, in order for them to be useful, they have to go onto models that are going to be able to really employ the ability.
Mm-hmm.
And I could definitely see in some instances really only a master or a henchman or like a more significant model is going to be able to really utilize the specific tech ones.
Right.
But in general, I mean, I'm right with you. From a design standpoint, making it so that you can only get maximum value and not just maximum value, but the what you really want can only be attached to weaker models
Mm-hmm.
is a interesting decision point. I think it's a good thing for the game.
Yeah, because I think there's a number of upgrades, and I guess we'll cover them later. That I feel if like the minion only ability was just available to everyone, like they would become auto takes.
Right, right. And also, kind of on the flip side, there are abilities where like the upgrades are perfectly fine, but the minion ability is meaningless. So you just never consider putting it on a minion.
Like Soulstone Cash.
Like Soulstone Cash, I guess. Now we're gonna get all these messages telling us how we're wrong about Soulstone Cash.
I mean, I would love to hear those messages because I do not see like a significant advantage. Like I can't see like, oh man, Soulstone Cash is like 100% the best upgrade in Arcanist. Like if it was only the minion upgrade, I'd take it all the time. So I can just have a little model follow around my master and give her plus when I burn a Soulstone. Like it's just so situational, and the fact that it's like limited within 5 inches. Like there's so many conditions that need to be fulfilled to get such a minor benefit.
Right. Now, I mean, one way I could see, if it's a summoning master, so you're going to be spending the stones pretty frequently, or, if it's like Colette's Presto Chango, you basically have to spend a stone. Anytime I think suiting for stones is going to be like a pretty high likelihood, that's probably a flip that you're going to want to succeed, and so getting a plus flip on that could be quite nice.
I mean, like, I'm not going to be here and like, oh man, getting a plus flip on stuff would be useless, but it's like, you got to be within 5 inches of this little model that's just going to follow around, like your models that can actually use the soulstone. So it's like just limiting your positional capabilities in the game and just like reducing your influence just so you can get plus flips whenever you decide to use the soulstone on, like your master or your henchman that this little, I guess, like soulstone engine is following around.
No, I mean, I tend to agree, but those of you out there, send us an email, arrange a time to play Colgan over Vassal, and just totally destroy him with your minion Soulstone Cash Horde.
I would just like to push back. I don't think that's a valid argument. I'm not saying I'm good at the game. I'm sure a lot of people could like beat me with suboptimal crews, but that does not mean a card is good or an upgrade is good, okay? I'm just going to put that out there.
Okay, well, on that note, I think that's pretty much all we could say about Arcanist Upgrades at the time, or at least all other people are willing to listen to us say. If you've sat through the episode, thank you very much. If you've been listening to the podcast, whether you stuck around for a couple episodes or this is your first time here, we really appreciate your attention and your interest. Please, send us an email if you'd like to hear our opinions on something else, or if you'd like to send us feedback or suggestions on things we could be doing better. If you want to support the channel with a like or a comment or a share, like all those would be super great. We we play in Southern California here, but we're interested in being a part of the wider Malifaux community, and that's part of the reason why we're doing this podcast. If you'd like to support the podcast in other ways, we do have a PayPal or Patreon, and the link is in the show notes. So I mean, any sort of help of any manner would be great. Otherwise, I'm gonna sign off for now until next time. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.